Title: Broken Bond. Emma had always been the perfect sister. The responsible one, the protective one, the one who always looked out for her younger brother Jake. With a 6-year age gap between them, she had practically raised him, becoming more of a parental figure than their absent father ever was. Their mother worked long hours to keep a roof over their heads, leaving Emma to take care of Jake. She fed him, helped him with his homework, protected him from bullies, and reassured him when he was scared of thunderstorms. She was his world, and in a way he was hers. But as they grew older, things changed. The dynamic that had once been so simple, older sister, younger brother, became complicated. Jake was no longer the helpless child who needed her constant guidance. He had grown into his own person, tall, independent, and with a sharp wit that often left Emma speechless. He no longer clung to her side, but his presence was still a constant in her life. Their bond remained unbreakable, though at times, it felt as though something unspoken lingered between them. Emma had met Ryan in her first year of college. He was everything she thought she wanted: charming, confident, and just a little bit reckless. He made her feel alive, like she wasn't just a girl weighed down by responsibilities. For the first time in her life, she had something for herself, something separate from Jake and the never-ending cycle of being his caretaker. Ryan gave her excitement, a sense of freedom she never knew she craved. She fell for him fast, letting herself believe that she had finally found her escape. Jake, now 16, was no longer the little kid she had once protected. He had grown into his own person, rebellious, sharp-witted, and far too observant for his own good. He had a way of seeing through people, of picking up on things no one else did. And one day, he saw something that shattered Emma's world. Ryan was cheating. Jake had caught him plain as day with another girl, someone Emma thought was a friend. At first, he hadn't wanted to tell her. He knew how much she loved Ryan, how she looked at him with admiration and devotion. But Jake also couldn't stand watching his sister being lied to. He had seen how much she had given to Ryan, how much of herself she had lost in trying to keep the relationship together. When he finally blurted it out, the betrayal was like a punch to the gut. Emma felt sick, her vision swimming as she processed the words. She refused to believe it at first, told Jake that he must have been mistaken. But the evidence was there. Messages, photos, all laid out in front of her. She confronted Ryan, but he denied everything. Laughed it off. Called Jake a liar. He tried to twist the truth, turn it into a misunderstanding, make her doubt herself. But Emma wasn't stupid. The evidence was undeniable, and the longer she looked at Ryan, the more she realized how blind she had been. The humiliation hit her harder than the heartbreak. How could she have been so foolish? How could she have given so much of herself to someone who never truly cared? Jake, seeing her pain, became her rock. He was the one who held her when she cried, who raged on her behalf, who promised her that she deserved better. He refused to let her sink into despair. And in the quiet moments between them, something shifted. They spent more time together. Late-night drives, deep conversations, stolen moments of vulnerability. Jake had always been her closest person, but now it felt different. Felt heavier, more intense. He wasn't just her little brother anymore. He was the one who understood her pain more than anyone else. He was the one who stayed when Ryan had left. He was the one who had always been there. One night, they sat on the roof of their house, looking at the stars, the air thick with something unspoken. Emma, lost in thought, whispered, "I don't know what I'd do without you." Jake turned to her, his gaze steady. "You'll never have to find out." For the first time in weeks, she smiled. Maybe she had lost Ryan. Maybe she had been betrayed. But Jake had always been there, and he always would be. But the closeness between them didn't go unnoticed. Their mother started to watch them more closely, sensing something she couldn't quite name. Emma's friends began to make comments about how much time she was spending with Jake, how different they seemed around each other. She brushed it off, telling them they didn't understand, that Jake was all she had. But deep down she wondered if maybe they were right. Maybe she was holding on too tightly. Jake, however, had no doubts. He had always known that he belonged to Emma, in a way no one else ever could. And as far as he was concerned, nothing and no one was going to change that. Emma tried to fight it. She tried to distance herself to create space, but every time she did, the ache in her chest grew unbearable. She didn't want to lose him. She didn't want to be alone. And when she looked into his eyes, she saw that same desperation reflected back at her. The world could judge. Let them. It didn't matter. Because in the end, Emma and Jake only had each other. They always had. And they always would. But the real question remained, was this love or something far more dangerous? To be continued. The days passed in a blur. Emma tried to convince herself that everything was normal, that nothing had changed between her and Jake. But deep down she knew better. She felt it in the way he looked at her. Longer, more intense, as if waiting for something she wasn't sure she was ready to give. She spent more time out of the house, trying to distract herself. She reconnected with old friends, started going to the gym, even considered dating again. But no matter how much she tried to move forward, she kept coming back to the same realization. She didn't want to be with anyone else. Jake noticed her pulling away. He wasn't naive. He could feel the distance growing between them, and it frustrated him. He had always been able to rely on Emma, always trusted that she would be there. Now she was slipping through his fingers, and he refused to let it happen. One evening, as Emma sat in the living room scrolling through her phone, Jake walked in and sat beside her. Too close. The air between them grew thick with unspoken words. "You've been avoiding me," he said, his voice calm but firm. Emma stiffened. "No, I haven't." "Yes, you have," he countered, leaning in slightly. "Talk to me. What's wrong?" She sighed, setting her phone aside. "I don't know, Jake. Maybe I just need some space." His jaw clenched. Space from what? She hesitated, choosing her words carefully. "From whatever this is." Jake's eyes darkened. "And what exactly is this?" Emma swallowed hard. She knew there was no way to dodge the conversation any longer. "We've been too close, Jake. People are noticing. Mom is noticing." He scoffed. "So what? Let them notice. Why should we care what anyone thinks?" "Because it's not normal," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Jake exhaled sharply and ran a hand through his hair. "What if I don't care about normal?" Emma looked away, conflicted. She felt his gaze burning into her, waiting for an answer she didn't have. After a long silence, she whispered, "We can't." Jake didn't respond right away. Instead, he reached out, taking her hand in his. "You say that, but I know you don't believe it." She wanted to pull away, to create the space she desperately needed. But she didn't. She sat there, her hand in his, her heart hammering against her ribs. The moment stretched, tension crackling between them like static electricity. Then, footsteps in the hallway shattered the silence. Their mother appeared in the doorway, her eyes flickering between them with suspicion. "What's going on here?" she asked, her tone careful. Emma pulled her hand back, forcing a smile. "Nothing, Mom. We were just talking." Their mother didn't look convinced. "All right," she said slowly. "Dinner's ready." As she walked away, Emma turned to Jake, panic flashing in her eyes. "See, this is exactly what I mean. We have to stop whatever this is before it goes too far." Jake's expression hardened. "And what if it's already too late?" Emma's breath hitched. She had no answer. No way to untangle herself from the mess they had created. All she knew was that something had to give. The tension between Emma and Jake had reached a breaking point. Every moment they spent together felt like they were teetering on the edge of something dangerous, something that neither of them fully understood but couldn't ignore. Emma tried to stay away, to put space between them, but every time she pulled back, Jake found a way to bring her closer. It wasn't intentional, it was just the way things had always been. They were drawn to each other like two planets caught in each other's gravitational pull, unable to break free no matter how hard they tried. One evening, Emma came home late after spending hours at a cafe, trying to clear her head. As she walked into the house, she found Jake sitting alone on the couch, the glow of the television casting shadows on his face. He barely acknowledged her as she stepped inside, but she could feel the weight of his thoughts pressing down on the room. "Jake," she started, her voice soft, almost hesitant. He didn't look at her right away. His fingers tightened around the remote in his hand. "You don't have to keep running, you know." Emma sighed, setting her bag down by the door. "I'm not running. I'm just trying to do the right thing." Jake let out a humorless laugh. "The right thing for who?" "You." "Me." "Mom." She hesitated. "For us." He finally turned to face her, and she saw something in his eyes that made her chest tighten. Pain, frustration, something else she couldn't quite place. "You act like this is something we can control, but it's not." Emma took a slow step forward. "Jake, we can't keep doing this. People are starting to notice." "So what?" he shot back, his voice sharper than he intended. "Why does it matter what anyone thinks?" "Because it just does," she whispered, but even as she said it, she wasn't sure she believed it anymore. Silence settled between them, thick and heavy. The room felt too small, too suffocating, like the walls were closing in around them. Emma swallowed hard and turned away, heading for the stairs. She needed distance, needed to breathe, needed time to think. But before she could take another step, Jake's voice stopped her. "Emma." She turned, her heart pounding. "What?" He stood up, his gaze locked onto hers. "Tell me you don't feel it." Her breath hitched. She opened her mouth to respond, to deny it, to tell him that he was wrong, but no words came out. Because the truth was, she did feel it. She had felt it for a long time. And it terrified her. Jake took a slow step forward. "Say it, Emma." She shook her head, her hands trembling. "I can't." "You won't," he corrected, his voice quiet but firm. "Because you know it's real." Emma felt something inside her crack, the walls she had so carefully built beginning to crumble. Tears burned in her eyes as she whispered, "Jake, please." But he didn't move, didn't look away. "Just say it." The air between them felt electric, charged with something too big for either of them to contain. Emma's pulse pounded in her ears as she struggled to breathe, to think, to make sense of everything that was happening. And then, without another word, she turned and ran up the stairs, slamming her door shut behind her. But no matter how far she ran, she knew she could never outrun the truth. Emma locked herself in her room, pressing her back against the door as if that could keep everything out. Keep him out. But she knew it was useless. The weight of the past few weeks, of every stolen glance, every whispered word, every unspoken truth, sat heavy on her chest. She could hear Jake pacing downstairs, his frustration seeping through the walls. She needed to end this, once and for all. The night dragged on. She didn't sleep. Her thoughts churned endlessly, replaying every moment between them. It wasn't supposed to be like this. He was her brother, her Jake. The one who had always been there, the one she had sworn to protect, the one who had never left her side. And yet, morning came too soon. The house was eerily quiet. Emma finally forced herself out of bed and tiptoed downstairs, heart pounding. She expected to see Jake waiting for her, ready for another fight, another argument. But he wasn't there. His car was gone. Panic tightened around her chest. Where did he go? She grabbed her phone, hesitating before dialing his number. Straight to voicemail. Again. And again. Hours passed. The pit in her stomach grew deeper, darker. She sat by the window, watching the driveway, waiting for him to come home. Finally, as the sun dipped below the horizon, she heard the front door open. Jake stepped inside, his expression unreadable. His eyes were tired, darker than usual. Something inside Emma twisted. "Where were you?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. He exhaled sharply, running a hand through his hair. "I needed to think." She swallowed hard. "Jake. We need to stop this." He looked at her then, really looked at her, and something in his gaze made her throat tighten. "Stop what, Emma?" Her breath hitched. "You know what?" Jake's jaw clenched. He took a step closer. You keep saying that, but you don't mean it. I do, she insisted, though the words felt hollow. This isn't right. His hands balled into fists at his sides. Then why does it feel like the only thing that is? Emma's heart pounded. Because we're confused. Because we've been through too much together. Because we love each other, he interrupted, his voice raw. Silence hung between them. The final, undeniable truth laid bare between them. Tears welled in Emma's eyes. She shook her head. Not like this. We can't love each other like this. Jake's shoulders sagged, the fight draining out of him. For the first time in weeks he looked lost. So what happens now, he murmured. Emma stepped forward, reaching for his hand. He didn't pull away. We move on. We live our lives. We find happiness. Separately. He stared at their intertwined fingers before nodding, though she could see the pain behind his eyes. Yeah, he whispered. Okay. It was a lie, and they both knew it. But it was the only choice they had left. Jake pulled her into a hug, holding her tightly, as if memorizing the way she felt before letting go. Emma buried her face in his shoulder, allowing herself one last moment of weakness before stepping back. And then, with a quiet, lingering glance, she turned and walked away. Jake didn't stop her this time. Some things were never meant to be.